Evening, everyone. We have the pleasure of dialoguing with two great authors. I would like to start by introducing our first one, Lenore Nolan-Ryan.
Hello.
Tonight, we have the pleasure of welcoming someone who truly understands that the best stories just don't come from the pages. They come from the kitchen, the table, and the heart. And since I haven't had dinner tonight, this is going to be a delightful conversation. Our guest, Lenore Ryan, has spent more than 2 decades creating unforgettable culinary experiences as a professional chef, entrepreneur, and teacher. Through her work in the kitchen, she has brought people together, transforming meals into moments and recipes into lasting memories. But what makes her journey so compelling is how she has taken those same ingredients, passion, resilience, and deep love for connection, and poured them into her memoir. Love is the main ingredient. She doesn't just cook meals, she tells stories. And tonight we get to hear both. Please join me in welcoming Lenore Ryan.
Thank you very much. My pleasure, my passion to be here.
All right. It is also a true pleasure to welcome our guest author, Scott Eyman, one of the most respected voices in film history and biography. He has written 18 books, is that right? Yeah, including several New York Times bestsellers. He is widely recognized as a leading authority on Hollywood Golden Age and its most iconic figures, from Mary Pickford, Charlie Chaplin, to Cary Grant, John Wayne, and now Joan Crawford. And although Scott is one of South Florida's own today, he grew up in Cleveland. And his latest book, Joan Crawford, which we'll be discussing tonight, The Woman's Face, he gives us not only the portrait of a Hollywood legend, but of a strategist, a survivor, and a woman navigating an unforgiving industry with relentless discipline and unshakable will. Tonight's conversation with Scott will explore themes of identity, ambition, power, resilience, and the profound tension between public image and private truth. Please join me in welcoming Scott Eyman. All right, why don't we start with Lenore tonight? This is a beautiful cover, by the way.
Well, thank you.
And you look just as beautiful as the cover does. Yes.
Thank you.
All right, what brought on the name Love is the Main Ingredient?
Well, let me take you back to my first memory of cooking. And my first memory of cooking is I'm 4 years old, and I'm standing on a chair at the stove, and I have my little, to tell you how old I am, I've got my little Campbell soup outfit on, I've got my apron, I've got my hat, and my mother is showing me how to stir the figure 8. And I'm stirring the figure 8, and she comes to me, and when I tell this story, it's like I can smell the soup and I can smell those herbs in her hand. And she has these dried herbs in her hand, and she says, Lenore, always crush the dried herbs before you put them in the dish, and that will bring out all the flavor. And she does that, and she brings it up to my nose, and then she says, love is the main ingredient. So I'm 4 years old, and I'm thinking that just, I lived a life in the kitchen with my mother. I never saw a cookbook in the house. She was always smiling, she was always cooking, she was always creating, and she would open a cupboard in the refrigerator, and she'd laugh, and she'd say, Lenore, a little bit of this and a little bit of that, with a smile on your face, it'll always turn out right. And she was right. And so that's how I lived my life. So coming to the book and creating the memoirs, and my life has always been centered around food, it was very obvious to me what the name of the book should be. Love is the main ingredient, both in your life and in the kitchen.
All right, wonderful. And I really like how you started out the book with that, with a little bit of this and a little bit of that. It reminded me of visiting my grandmother's house, and I would say, Grandma, we don't have anything to eat. And she said, yes, we do, boy. And she would go into that kitchen and she'll pull this out and that, and she'll set all the dishes on the table, and before you know it, we have a feast going on.
A feast, exactly.
Yes, a little bit, some little bit of that. But you said in your book somewhere that if you didn't like what was in the kitchen, or she didn't, that you all would make a reservation.
Right, again, my mother's name was Lenore. Thank you, bless you, Mama. She always said, you know, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, with a smile on your face, and if it doesn't turn out right, you make a reservation. She was fearless. What's the worst that could happen? We make a reservation. We create a story. It's something to tell. It's something to talk about.
Oh, wonderful. We never got the reservation. We got a little bit of this and a little bit of that. All right. Mr. Scott Eyman, I have thoroughly enjoyed reading your book. You packed a punch in this one. Each page was loaded with details, things I never knew about Joan Crawford. Let me just give a couple examples of what I saw in here, and then we're going to talk a little bit about her. Joan Crawford was quite a woman. She was just like the rest of us, just common. One columnist who had lunch with her said, early in her career at MGM, he told a story about her table manners. The salad consisted of chopped vegetables nicely laid on a large lettuce leaf. She didn't want the lettuce, so she picked them out of the salad and tossed them over her shoulders onto a tray on the table. Tallulah Bankhead writes this about her. She invited Joan Crawford to her house, and she says, I must rest, Crawford. Come by later. And when she stopped by, she brought her knitting needles. And Tallulah said, if you don't put those knitting needles down, I shall die. But she says, listen, I don't drink or smoke. I don't put on performance, so let me do what I like. Quite interesting lady. But this is the part I really like about her. So in her early years, Crawford had been a light drinker. By the time she started going out to parties, she was carrying her own flask. I like her. She's my kind of woman. Her flask was 100 proof vodka to parties, just in case the hostess had only stocked the 80 proof. She would order tonic and ice and supplement them with vodka from her own flask. You certainly have written some quite interesting details about Joan Crawford. What got you interested in writing about Joan Crawford when there were so many others who had written about her?
My main proviso is I wanted to write about a woman. I'd written 8 or 9 books consecutively about men, and I was just sick to death of men, which I'm sure a number of you can agree with me about. Why was I sick to death of men? I've developed this theory from writing about predominantly men that they're impossible to know. If you ask a man what's bugging him, chances are he's not going to tell you, or he'll lie. If you ask a woman what's bugging her, chances are she's going to tell you what's bugging her. And I like the transparency, the emotional transparency of a woman. And I was desperate to write about a woman because of the emotional transparency. And I was right. If you asked Crawford what was bugging her, you were going to get it. And I but it was a leap into the unknown, because when you start a book like this, and it's 4 years out of your life, and at this point, every 4-year segment is rather precious to me. You know, it's like a relationship, and you don't know if it's going to work out or if it's not going to work out. It's a leap into the unknown. And luckily, I really, really enjoyed getting to know her and spending time with her, and, if you will, climbing into bed with her, because that's what you do if you're a serious biographer. You know, you know everything about them. You know what they drank and how much they drank, and how they like their drinks mixed, and what their sex life was like, and everything else. And then you have to figure out, well, what's important? What's really important about this person? What signifies character? And that's where the narrative comes in, and that's where the bond comes in, or the lack of a bond in some cases. So that's a long answer to a short question.
All right. So what made Joan Crawford's story stand out for you?
Where she started and where she finished. I mean, she was, John Steinbeck could have used her as a character in The Grapes of Wrath. She was born in squalor in Texas, in small towns in Texas, and in Oklahoma and Kansas. She had a grade school education, period. She had to work her way through junior high and high school, which meant she actually was never in class. She was making beds and cooking meals for the other students. Basically, it was kind of a Dickensian childhood. And Dickensian childhoods make fascinating people. Charlie Chaplin had a childhood that was even worse than Crawford's. But what a childhood like that does is you either transcend it or you drown, basically. Either way, you're going to be marked for life. You don't really escape it either way. Certainly it marked Chaplin in his desperate accumulation of money. So nothing like that could ever happen to him again, or his children, or his grandchildren, or his great-grandchildren. They're all comfortable because of the money he made. Crawford was like Scarlett O'Hara. I will never be hungry again. And she lived her life desperate to put a really, really grim childhood and adolescence behind her. And I don't think she ever intended to be an actress. Her only intention was to be a dancer. Mm-hmm. Acting was a pure accident that dropped in her lap. So she had to figure out, how do I do this? She was a dancer for the Schuberts in New York, in the chorus line. And I knew I was going to like her when I found an interview with her where she said, I wasn't good enough for the first line of the chorus. I was in the second line. I love the honesty, you know. And if you watch her dance, and she loved to dance, but she's kind of clunky, to be perfectly honest. And I'm sure she was, but you could see she loved it. She didn't care if she was clunky or not. She knew she wasn't Ginger Rogers, but it gave her pleasure, which was the most important thing. So I love the idea of someone who's passionate about something that they don't really have an enormous amount of aptitude for, but they do it because they love it. You know? I know writers like that, as a matter of fact. We all know writers like that. But that's basically why I found her such a joy to write about. The idea of setting goals, the idea of transcendence, the idea of becoming something that you want to be desperately, without quite knowing how you're going to do it, but you do it anyway, one step at a time, one day at a time.
All right, Lenore, back to you. So when I'm looking through your book, I see quite a few interesting recipes. How did you decide which recipes would be included in this book?
Well, it wasn't really about the recipes to be included. It was about the memory. And the memories are what's really the first part of every chapter. Mm-hmm. And with every memory, you see, I lived my life with food. Food is my love language, and it started from a very young age, stirring that figure 8. So every memory that I was talking about, the memoirs, they were all, food was just intertwined with everything that I did. I wasn't the girl to have sleepovers. I was the girl to have dinner parties. I was the one that was always um, we would go to these fabulous restaurants. I was born in Miami Beach. My father had casinos in Havana and in Las Vegas. And so we really lived a wonderful lifestyle, and I was always exposed to very interesting things. And I can remember going to this wonderful restaurant called DiTardo's with caricatures of like Joan Crawford and Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman on the walls. And we would sit with my family and, you know, I'd have a Shirley Temple. Well, I didn't want to be a young girl anymore. I wanted to be a young lady. So I asked the waiter if I could have a ginger ale with olive juice and an olive. That was that was how I lived. It was all about the food. And so the memory of living in that time, there was always a food item, a recipe. We were always entertaining. My mother was a fabulous cook. I never saw a recipe. I never saw a cookbook in the house, so it never occurred to me to even go to culinary school. It was just all about the food. The food was the denominator that brought life and love into our household, and I saw how it pleased everyone, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be just like my mother.
Very nice. I did read that you said in your book, you said that food is an expression of love. I really like that. Was there a specific moment in your life when the idea became clear to you? I wasn't just tasting a meal, but I was feeling celebrated.
Yes, that's a very good question, because I can remember when I had this idea, and I was living in Indianapolis studying voice and piano, loved to sing, but I was studying voice and piano, and I had this idea that Indianapolis needed another place for brunch. I don't know where I got the idea, but it wasn't until I was writing the memoir that I understood where I got the idea. So I had an idea that Indianapolis needed another place for brunch. You could go to the top of the Hyatt or the diner or the, just the little place around the corner and get pancakes and whatever. But I wanted to do quiches and confitures and tarts, and so I did. I went to a restaurant that we were always going to, my friends and I, called The Pleasant Peasant, and I said, how about if I rent your restaurant out and I serve brunch and I'll pay you a percentage? And Marinka and her mother were the owners, and they said, okay. So all of a sudden I was in business. Now I just, I had to make the food, pour the coffee, put the flowers in the vase, figure out how to make hollandaise, figure out how to make all those tarts without going to culinary school. But while I was writing the memoir, I remember that I got the idea from sitting at my Aunt Betty's table in the kitchen with her stacks of gourmet magazines. And these stacks of gourmet magazines, one of them was all about Paris. And it had all these boulangeries, patisseries, and these beautiful pictures of these quiches and confitures and jams and jellies and tarts. And that's what I really wanted to do. So it was that moment, thinking about that really put me in the direction and really solidified that this was not only what made me happy, this was my passion, and my passion became my gift. And when you find your gift, that defines your purpose.
Absolutely. And I like what you said in your book. Say, here's the truth. Know what you want. Ask for it, then relax into the certainty that it is already yours. And when you were telling the story about asking the lady if you could use her restaurant to do your brunch, that's exactly what you did. It also reminded me in your book where you were cooking and one of your customers had just finished eating a wonderful meal. And then she asked you, have you ever thought about catering? without even thinking about it, you said, yes, I will cater.
Yes. And
Wonderful.
that was at the Pleasant Peasant. And she asked me, Lenore, do you do catering? And I said, yes. I called my mother. My mother gave me $400, beautiful silver pieces, linens, and that was my very first catering job. I was 19.
Awesome. We'll come back to that. All right. So Scott, in your book, you gave good detail about Joan Crawford. She started out as Lucille LeSueur, and then she later became Billy Cassie.
Casson.
And then Joan Crawford. My question to you, do you see one evolving identity or deliberate reinvention of these characters here in this book?
Her life was an evolution, almost a continual evolution. Sometimes self-induced, sometimes visited upon her. I mean, the transition from Lucille LeSueur to Billy Casson was because her father disappeared either just before she was born or just after she was born. So she grew up without a father. Her mother, Joan's father was her mother's second husband. She married Joan's father precisely 1 week after her first husband died. So make of that what you will. Her third husband, there was no third husband. She just lived with a succession of men. So Joan Crawford was a name that was given her when she was hired by MGM in 1925 at the age of 20. She was, as I said, working with the Schuberts as a chorus girl, and she did a screen test, and she photographed magnificently, and you can't fake that. Either you photograph well or you don't photograph well. She didn't look like the Joan Crawford we know now because she was 15 pounds heavier, and her cheekbones didn't pop. She had those incredible eyes, but when she got to the studio in Culver City, they took one look at her and said, honey, you got to lose some weight. And so she lost the weight. She lived on coffee and saltines for 6 months and dropped 15 or 20 pounds and stayed at that weight for the rest of her life. She never gained an ounce after that. And they gave her the name Joan Crawford, which she hated. She said it sounded like a dish at a fish restaurant.
Crawfish.
Yeah, she really objected to it. But she learned to live with it because she became famous with it, and you're not going to change the name after you become famous. But there was a continual process of reinvention in terms of who she was, her look. Her look changed imperceptibly, but noticeably every 5 or 6 years. You know, the eyebrows got thicker, her hairstyles changed. It's the recognizable person, Mildred Pierce, as she was 10 years earlier, but there's a fatalism to it, to her performance that was not there in 1934 or 35 when she's doing Mildred Pierce. She's more world-weary, more bitter, and that incremental progression, is that the part she was playing, or is that a projection of her personality as she aged? Yes.
And I think you did an excellent job weaving all three of those personalities throughout the book. But which version of her feel closest to the real person?
I think she was always Billy Casson. I think she was always a scruffy little ragamuffin kid. Because I don't know that we ever really transcend our image of ourselves that we get in childhood, you know, for good or ill. You were lucky. Your mother adored you. So that follows you all the rest of your life. Billy's mother didn't particularly love her, and Billy didn't particularly love her mother. It was more of a so there was that sense of hunger and that sense of longing and that sense of always looking for something or somebody that could give you what you didn't have when you needed it the most, when you're a child. So, but that's not unusual. A lot of show business people, a lot of movie stars have this kind of background, you know, and I think the transference is they're getting something from the audience, or they hope to get something from the audience that they never got from anybody else, and any individual, not from their parents, not from their girlfriends or boyfriends, not from their wives or husbands.
Speaking of that, we know that Joan Crawford had several relationships before marriages. She married Douglas Fairbank, Franchot Tone, Philip Terry, and Alfred Steele. Do you see a pattern or simply four very different chapters of Joan's life with these men?
Douglas Fairbanks Jr. and Franchot Tone were aspirational marriages because they were both educated, they were both elegant, they both had a lot of class, which was all qualities that she always was trying to absorb. So those were aspirational marriages, trying to climb the ladder, as it were. Philip Terry was comfort. The war was on. She had adopted all these children, and she was a single woman at this point, and there was a complete disparity between his money and his career and hers. So there was a grinding of gears. The marriage was doomed from the start. Al Steele was the president of the Pepsi-Cola Corporation. He looked like a barrel with legs. He wasn't particularly attractive, but he was self-confident. He knew the ways of the world. He could instruct her. He took a lot of her fears away. She had a terrible fear of flying. She didn't like to go up in elevators because what if the cable breaks? You know, she had these kind of irrational fears from childhood. And he was able to get her over those fears. And by the end of her life, she was hopping on planes every week, you know, but he died after 4 years of marriage. He just had a massive coronary. And that was actually, even though he was nothing to look at, that was by far the most emotionally satisfying of her marriages. Yeah. And she never remarried after that. And she had very few relationships after that. It kind of ended that aspect of her life, his death.
All right. Nora, back to you. So was it Indianapolis, Indiana?
Indianapolis, Indiana.
Where you live. And all of a sudden, someone invited you to San Francisco for the weekend, or how did that go?
Yes, a girlfriend of mine that lived in Indianapolis had moved to San Francisco. And she said, Lenore, come for a long weekend. And I did, and I stayed 24 years. I fell in love with the city. It wrapped its arms around me.
And that's not all.
And that's not all.
Yeah. Tell us about it.
Well, I took the very same concept of leasing out a restaurant that was already operational. And within 3 years, I was in 3 different restaurants simultaneously, doing Saturday and Sunday brunches, which I just adored. And then I met the love of my life, Michael Leo Patrick Ryan. And that's how I became Lenore Nolan-Ryan. And we married, and he was driving cab, and I was doing the first of the restaurants, and he would drive by, and I'd wave, and he'd wave. And then one day he was driving by, and I went, like, we were busy. You need to come in and help me. So eventually he stopped driving cab, and we, a year later, opened up our own place called Ryan's, which was in a 3-story Victorian. And we had a restaurant, catering company, retail food store, wine bar, charcuterie, all housed in this beautiful 3-story Victorian.
Before we get to the Ryan, I want to hear about your catering business. And in your writing, you talk about having to cater for a pot fest.
Oh, you want to talk about
yes.
that? Well, here I am in Northern California, you know, a girl from Indiana, well, originally Miami Beach, but Indiana. And we had some friends, and, you know, in the days of kind of marijuana bringing, you know, so much the love aspect to San Francisco, and we had some friends that had some pot farms in Northern California. Now, these were, I mean, they were beautiful. They were really lush and beautiful, and they had beautiful homes. But during the harvest season, you have to harvest lots and lots and lots of plants. And I got to be the caterer for those pot farm harvests. And there were probably 20 people that were sitting around. We're all family and friends, and I've done, since then, I've done their weddings, I've done their baby showers and some memorials, but, that was back in the 80s. So, yes.
Tough time. All right.
That's the business we should have gone into.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
It was a very fun and interesting life.
All right. All right.
And I
back to
do
you.
make the best brownies, I say without hesitation. That recipe is not in the book. You'll have to ask me specifically for that. Happy to give it out.
All right, let's go back to Scott and talk a little bit more about Joan, motherhood. So she adopted 5 children. Four?
Four.
All
Four.
right.
Twin girls, Christina and Christopher, 4 in all.
Yes, and there was one that she adopted, but the mother wanted him back, right? All right.
The
all
mother
right.
changed her mind and took the kid.
So when Christina wrote Mama Dearest, tell us what your take on it. Based on the research you've done, is there any truth to any of this?
Well, the book came out a year after Crawford died. She died in 77. So it came out in 78. The movie came out in 80 or 81. And I remember my mother had a copy of it, and I remember reading it. And Joan Crawford meant nothing to me at this point. I mean, I was interested in old movies, but I wasn't, that interested in old movies. Anyway, it was there, so I read it in a couple days. And so I'm in my 20s at this point. And I thought, well, this is actually pretty well written for a hit job. But it was so, even at the time, I thought, this is kind of over the top, and clearly there was an enormous amount of animus there. And as I got, so 30, 40 years go by, and I'm working on the book. And I'm talking to Crawford's grandson, the son of one of the twins. And she took him and his sister for weekends, on a regular, once a month. She would take her grandchildren to her apartment in New York on East 70th, I think it was. And the parents would go out to dinner in a theater and, go to a hotel, and she would keep them for, 36 hours or something. And she was great. She was just a marvelous grandmother, and she'd cook them the kind of food that they wanted to eat, and they'd go to Chinatown for dinner, and Chinatown was exotic and fascinating, and the kids loved Chinatown. But she never took them to a movie. She was off. She'd quit making movies, and I thought this was really telling, that she absolutely would not take the kids to a movie, not even Disney. She just didn't want to see a movie. I think maybe because she'd get the hunger, Anyway, so that gave me entree into a side of her that, was certainly not evident in Mommy Dearest. And in going through oral histories and talking to other people, I found like 15 people who were still alive who knew her. 15, maybe 18 people. I got a, shall we say, more nuanced version of her life and her various roles that she played off screen. And let's just say there was, she and Christina had a deadly relationship. They hadn't spoken in like 3 years or 4 years before Crawford's death. She disinherited Christina from the will. So Christina was not without a certain platform of rage to write the book. So what I tried to do was not necessarily say, well, this is all bullshit, but to create a more nuanced picture with different points of view than just one. If that answers your question.
It does. It does. Let's talk a little about the turning of the tide with MGM. Crawford had been a favorite of theirs. They poured an enormous amount of talent, money into her becoming who we know her to be. But towards the end, the industry changed. And she really wasn't quite prepared. Tell us a little about that.
Well, she went there when she was 20 years old. And she was there from 1925 to 1942, 43. So that's a long haul for a movie star at one studio. They tended to hop around every 5, 6, 7 years. And And what was happening at Metro was there was a generational shift because Crawford had been there since silent films, for God's sakes. And they're getting younger actresses like Hedy Lamarr and Lana Turner and Greer Garson, and suddenly they're getting parts that would have gone to Crawford. And she could sense what was going on because she was a pro by this time. She could see because she'd seen this happen to other actresses at MGM. Happened at every studio. You age out, essentially. And at this point, remember, there was no television, there was no streaming, there was only the movie business. And if you aged out of the movie business, there was no place else to go, unless you wanted to do live theater, 8 performances a week, and not a lot of money.
Exactly.
So there was no second or third level at which you could work when you aged out of carrying the hot, young, sexy thing parts. But she knew that things were changing, and so she made the decision to quit MGM. And she was out of work for about a year. And she signed with Warner Brothers finally, and there was a great deal of back and forth about who was going to do Mildred Pierce. They offered it to Stanwyck. Stanwyck turned it down, which was stupid. Although, frankly, I think Crawford was better than Stanwyck would have been, because we'd already seen Stanwyck blowing guys away in Double Indemnity. You know, she kind of she'd done that before. Crawford hadn't. So when Crawford did Mildred Pierce, it was this huge comeback, and it gave her this burst of gasoline that propelled her well into the 1950s, you know, still a name above the title star, which I think probably surprised her a little bit, because she knew that, I mean, if Mildred Pierce hadn't been a huge hit, if she hadn't gotten the Best Actress Oscar, I don't know where she was going to go from that point on. And because she had 4 kids, she's the sole support of the 4 kids. She's spent a lot of money. William Haynes did all of her houses and was always redecorating and doing this and that and the other thing. And Billy Haynes would take your last nickel. She had all of her clothes were custom. You didn't buy off the rack if you're a big movie star. You had to have custom clothes. So it was a very high overhead lifestyle. So and she wasn't broke when she died. She died with $1.4 million in 1977. So $1.4 million in 1977 is, I don't know, 8 or 10 million today. So she had money, but she wasn't incalculably wealthy because of her overhead, and she lived like a movie star.
Yep, that she did. All right, Lenore, let me ask you. You spent 20 years in San Francisco.
Yes.
You and your husband decided that you were all going to pack it up, and you were coming back to Florida.
Exactly.
And somewhere I read in your book that you were still trying to decide between 2 careers, singing and catering. And I think there was a song that you had in here. What was it?
What song?
That I want you to sing?
You want me to sing?
Sing just a little bit of the song.
What song do you want?
Let me find out what it is on here.
Was it Jet Plane?
No, not Jet
Oh,
Plane.
no, I left my heart in San Francisco?
That's it.
I left my heart in San Francisco. See, when Michael and I would go across the Golden Gate Bridge, he'd always have me sing to him. So when we finally decided to move back home, I was coming back home, and he was going to come with me. I'd been in San Francisco for 24 years, and I remember we decided to do a cross-country trip, and our mantra was friends, blues clubs, and national parks. And we took 6 weeks to do it. There was no rhyme or reason. It was just like we go here, we go there, see somebody else. Oh, let's go see them. And so I left my heart in San Francisco.
Yes, that's it. Becky, you have a lovely voice.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lenore-Ryan. And
Lenore
Scott
Nolan-Ryan.
Eyman. Yes.
Nolan-Ryan.
Nolan-Ryan.
Nolan-Ryan. It's a
All right.
mouthful, I know.
We have time for 1 question. 2 questions? Yes, from the audience. Yes. I think he's here.
Yes, I understand that there was a fight between Crawford and Betty Davis. Is that true?
On whatever happened to Baby Jane? No, it wasn't
No.
true. They didn't like each other. But it was a low-budget picture made on a very short shooting schedule, and there was no time for diva behavior and arguments and flouncing around into the dressing room and slamming the door and coming out 2 hours later. There was no time. I think they had 28 days to make the picture, and it's 2.5 hours long. They didn't talk off camera. You know, there was no, let's have lunch together and a couple drinks. No, there was nothing like that. They were both, Davis had and the problem came after the film was a huge hit. Davis was nominated for Best Actress. Crawford was not. Crawford announced that she would be happy to accept the Oscar for whoever won, as long as it wasn't Betty Davis. And Anne Bancroft got the Oscar that year for The Miracle Worker, leaving, you know, Davis not getting anything, and Crawford accepted the award for Anne Bancroft because it was doing a play in New York at the time. And Davis just chewed the carpet. She went nuts. And she took it as a personal insult and basically spent the rest of her life hating Joan Crawford. But Davis was a good hater. Davis always had to have somebody as a target, you know. She was a really tough piece of work, Davis. They didn't really have any contact after that. They were going to do a sequel, not a sequel, but a follow-up called Hush, Hush, Sweet Charlotte, which is actually a pretty decent movie. So is Baby Jane, actually. And Davis gave Crawford such a hard time that Crawford had to go to the hospital because she developed like pleural pneumonia, and her white blood cell count skyrocketed, and she was in the hospital for a week, came out, tried to start working again. The lung thing acted up again, back in the hospital. Finally, the insurance company said, we're going to shut the picture down and you got to recast the part because this isn't happening. It's going way over budget. So Olivia de Havilland, Davis wanted Olivia de Havilland. Robert Aldrich, the director who had done Baby Jane, he wanted Vivian Leigh. And Vivian Leigh cabled him and said, I could just about stand to be in a New Orleans swamp at 6 in the morning with Joan Crawford, but never with Betty Davis. So she turned it down. One or two other people turned it down. Finally, there was no one left except Olivia de Havilland, who was Davis's choice because they were buddies. So Olivia de Havilland took the job and did it. But that's the small version of the Crawford-Davis relationship.
One more. All right. Well, thank you all so much. Book signing is outside.
Thank you very
Please
much.
give our authors and moderator
Thank
a
all
round of
of you.
applause,
Thank you
everyone.
very much.
We will be selling these authors' amazing books outside. They will be signing for the next 15 minutes. Thank you, everyone, so kindly for attending LitLIVE tonight. Thank you to our sponsor, the NSU Alvin Sherman Library Research and Information Technology Center. Thank you to the Broward County Library. And please, support your library. Our community needs them. Thank you. Have a wonderful evening.